Joining me now is someone really at the center of this whole discussion, Democratic Congressman from California and chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff. Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for being with us.
Pleasure.
Katie Porter, just a few miles down the road from you, her home district, and people have been watching how these House, and particularly from the swing districts, would go now that she's moved, and others getting a little bit shaky as well. Rauda from California as well says he'll make a decision by this weekend. Do you see momentum growing for impeachment?
There's certainly a growing number of House Democrats that are coming out in favor of impeachment. It's been a slow increase, but nonetheless an increase. Look, every member has to make an individual determination about what they think is right for the country. I have a Katie to my north, Katie Hill, and a Katie to my south, Katie Porter. They are at this point divided on the question. I do think, though, regardless of how people come out in terms of whether this is the right thing at the right time, people do need to be aware that there's a perception that if we announce an impeachment inquiry tomorrow, things change dramatically, that suddenly witnesses like Don McGahn, who've been resisting coming in, are going to show up and say, okay, where do I testify? The Justice Department's going to open its files. None of that is going to happen. We are still going to have to go to court. If anything, the administration will dig in deeper because now we've gone to sort of DEFCON 5. But nonetheless, there are any number of members who, I think, on a daily basis, look at the president's actions and say, okay, that's it for me. Now, whether we're going to get to critical mass or not, I don't know. It may depend on how the investigation proceeds.
What about the case of someone like Corey Lewandowski? Because there's been some discussion this week and some reports that there's a movement to put people like him before Congress as soon as possible, because Corey Lewandowski's got no claim of privilege. He's a political hack. And I don't say that disparagingly, but that's what he does. And he is at the center of part 2 of the Mueller report on the issue of obstruction. Why not sit him down tomorrow?
Well, we are trying to bring in witnesses like this that have no colorable claim of privilege. But I'll tell you, we brought him into the House Intel Committee, and he refused to answer questions, important questions. At that time, the Republicans were running in the committee, and they were all too fine with him saying, I'm not going to answer that. And why? Because I don't want to answer that.
Well, it's different this time. We're in charge of the committee.
It's different now, and we can insist on answers. But he can still make the same fallacious claims of privilege. We will have to go to court to litigate that and to force answers. A number of the witnesses didn't even claim privilege. They just said, we don't want to answer those questions. And we're going to have to prosecute that and litigate that in court, force there to be answers. But yes, it'll be quicker to get answers from third parties not connected with the administration. That's why we are going to places like Deutsche Bank for records. It's why we're going to places like the major accounting firm for records and information, why we're going to whistleblowers, because we can get more speedy access to them.
How long are you willing to wait for Robert Mueller to testify in public before the House?
Look, I think time is running out. The best way to get a witness to testify is if you can get them to testify voluntarily, and particularly, I think, with someone like Bob Mueller, making an appeal to his patriotism and sense of duty is the right way to go. But at the end of the day, he needs to come and testify.
Is August too late?
Yes, I think it is. I think we're reaching a point where if we can't reach an agreement, and I hope we will, then we'll have to use a subpoena.
Let me ask you about some really important intelligence issues right now. The New York Times had a report out over the weekend about cyber warfare. Basically, the United States intelligence services are now conducting against Russia, perhaps using malware to get inside some of their domestic systems. But the really interesting part about the story is that intelligence and defense officials didn't tell the president about it, according to the New York Times. Why? Because they were concerned either he would countermand the orders or he might leak them.
Yes.
What does that tell you?
Well, I can't comment, first of all, on whether the underlying issue is accurate or not, whether, there is that kind of cyber effort going on. But if it's true that the intelligence agencies or the cabinet members are keeping things from the president because they can't rely on him to keep his mouth shut when it comes to discussing matters with the Russians, with others, it's a real problem because we have a president who's not well informed. It's a problem because it means our allies are unwilling to share certain information with us because they're afraid if it gets to the president that he will betray their sources and methods. So obviously, it is deeply worrying from a national security point of view, but at the same time, it's not that surprising that people would feel that way. There is little trust, I think, in the discretion or patriotism when it comes down to it about the president and Russia.
Pentagon announced 1,000 troops headed to the Middle East. This has to do with Iran. You've seen the intelligence, I presume, at this point. Do you believe that Iran was behind the attack on the tankers, and do you support the move to move 1,000 U.S. troops?
I don't think there's any question that Iran was behind the attack on the tankers. There aren't many good candidates, and the intelligence is pretty clear. The bigger problem is that the administration has been going it alone, escalating pressure on Iran, reneging on the Iran nuclear deal. And now when you have Iran engaged in these provocative and belligerent acts attacking shipping, we can't find our allies anywhere. They're worried about this administration rushing to war. They don't have trust in the administration. The administration has ignored their warnings. And so here you have dangerous and bad actions by Iran, which is a uniquely malevolent actor. We ought to be working in concert with our allies. And yet Secretary Pompeo is still struggling to even persuade them about Iranian actions. And this is the problem when you attack your allies and you criticize them, when you don't even consult with them on important actions. And so my predominant risk right now is that we not take actions that lead us into war.
Let me ask you one political question here. You, of course, are a very senior Democrat now. Joe Biden is running for president, and he is talking about working with Republicans. I just want to play a little bit of the sound here.
And so, folks, look, if you start off with the notion there's nothing you can do, well, why don't you all go home then, man? Or let's start a real physical revolution if you're talking about it, because we have to be able to change what we're doing within our system.
Do you want the next president to work with Republicans? Do you think they are trustworthy partners?
I absolutely want the president to try to work across party lines and get things done. There are any number of challenges the country faces that, given our system of government, we're not going to be able to solve as one party. There are going to be times where we need to go it alone, but we should make an effort to work with the other side. If you look at the issues of infrastructure right now, if you look at prescription drug prices, if you look at ways that we can improve the operation of the Affordable Care Act, there are any number of ways we should work together, addressing the challenges to jobs in the economy through globalization and automation. These ought to be bipartisan initiatives, and there's certainly room for bipartisan work. But again, there has to be a willing party on the other side. There isn't a willing party right now. There's the president and this cult of personality around him, and they care only about building a wall, and that puts real limits on what we can do.
Mr. Chairman, Adam Schiff, thank you.